Please be seated. The sitting is open. The court meets this afternoon to hear Armenia present its single round of oral argument on the request for the indication of provisional measures submitted by the Republic of Azerbaijan on 4 January 2023 in the case concerning application of the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, Azerbaijan versus Armenia. I shall now give the floor to the agent of Armenia, His Excellency, Mr. Yegeshi Kyriakusan. You have the floor, Excellency.
Madam President, judges of the court, good afternoon. It is an honor to appear before you again as an agent of the Republic of Armenia. As I stand before you today, I hope you will see Azerbaijan's request for what it truly is, yet another transparent attempt to deflect attention from its own wrongdoing. We have seen this mirroring tactic every step of the parallel proceedings now before this court. After Armenia sent Azerbaijan a notice of dispute requesting negotiations under the third, Azerbaijan sent Armenia a notice of dispute calling for negotiations as well. After Armenia filed its application and request for provisional measures back in September 2021, Azerbaijan filed an application and request for provisional measures too. After Armenia raised concerns about Azerbaijan's non-compliance with the court's first order on provisional measures, Azerbaijan reactively raised alleged concerns of its own. The same pattern can be seen before the European Court of Human Rights. And now, after Armenia requested provisional measures concerning the ongoing humanitarian crisis precipitated by Azerbaijan's continuing effort to strangle the ethnic Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh, Azerbaijan has again sought to create a false sense of equivalence. Notably, this request for provisional measures by Azerbaijan is not in any way meaningfully different from the one rejected by this court over a year ago. Furthermore, Azerbaijan submitted its request only 6 days following Armenia's request, despite the fact that it has been in possession of most of its alleged evidence for months. In fact, the European Court of Human Rights, which was also requested by Azerbaijan to reconsider its earlier decision, rejected the request for interim measures in connection to Armenia's alleged laying of landmines. Judges of the court, allow me to be perfectly clear. Armenia has laid mines on its own sovereign territory for purely defensive purposes. Armenia has done so in the light of Azerbaijan's repeated acts of aggression, including most recently in September 2022. Azerbaijan's appetite for territory and concessions it seeks from Armenians have been increasing on a daily basis. It has used every opportunity to occupy new Armenian lands by force. This is a state that still holds ethnic Armenian prisoners of war and civilians as captives, targets civilians, encroaches on lands populated by Armenians, and ethnically cleanses such lands. And this is a state that is seeking to justify its own ongoing efforts to ethnically cleanse Nagorno-Karabakh by blaming peacekeeping forces for merely doing their job, by keeping opposing sides apart. But let me be equally clear. Armenia does not lay mines outside its sovereign territory, let alone in civilian areas, in a counterintuitive and implausible attempt to target Azerbaijani civilians on the basis of race. And Armenia has not and does not set booby traps ever, anywhere, at all. Azerbaijan has raised such accusations repeatedly, and they have been repeatedly refuted. The reality is that, as Armenia's council will explain, Azerbaijan collected the landmines about which it complains from Armenia's sovereign territories occupied by its own armed forces in 2021 and 2022. Azerbaijan is therefore seeking to use mines it collected following its own unlawful acts of aggression to manufacture false evidentiary basis to support its request. The request is therefore as cynical as it is unfounded, and I hope that the court will not permit Azerbaijan to abuse the court's process in an effort to benefit from its own wrongful acts. Madam President, judges of the court, I had not planned on mentioning the meeting scheduled to be held on 23 December 2022 between Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Russia. But this morning, the agent of Azerbaijan once again accused Armenia of refusing to engage in negotiations and of failing to show up at the meeting without prior notice. But as Armenia's foreign minister stated publicly on 24 December 2022, Armenia did notify its inability to attend the meeting in advance, and it also requested that it be postponed. Moreover, the issue of mines was not even on the agenda of that meeting, and it is therefore entirely irrelevant to those proceedings. Armenia's presentation this afternoon will proceed as follows. First, Professor Sean Murphy will illustrate why the allegedly new facts relevant to Azerbaijan's requests are either false or unproven. Second, Professor Robert Kolb will explain why the rights for which protection is being sought by Azerbaijan are not plausible. Third, Professor Pierre Darjan will discuss the provisional measures requested by Azerbaijan and summarize why those measures should not be granted. Finally, I will briefly return to the floor to read Armenia's final submissions. I thank you, Madam President, judges of the court, for your attention. I ask now that you call Professor Murphy to the floor. Thank you.
I thank the agent of Armenia for his statement, and I now invite Professor Sean Murphy to take the floor. You have the floor, Professor.
Thank you, Madam President. Members of the court, it's a great pleasure to appear before you and an honor to do so on behalf of the Republic of Armenia. As indicated by our agent, I will address the facts concerning the alleged laying of landmines and setting of booby traps in Azerbaijan that purportedly call for the court to issue provisional measures of protection. Madam President, allow me to start with Armenia's basic position regarding landmines, which is that since the end of the 44-day war, Armenia has carried out mine-laying exclusively within the sovereign territory of Armenia for self-defense purposes only. This has been necessary because in May 2021, November 2021, and September 2022, Azerbaijan forcibly crossed the border into Armenia and seized Armenian territory. The map on your screen illustrates the territories of Armenia that were occupied by Azerbaijan and that remain occupied today. Along the border between the two countries, you see various places colored in purple, orange, and pink, where Azerbaijan's armed forces have crossed the border and seized pockets of Armenian territory. These attacks and their condemnation by the international community are well documented. For example, the European Parliament in May of 2021 adopted a resolution saying that troops from Armenia had, and I quote, entered the territory of Armenia, which amounts to a violation of the territorial integrity of Armenia and of international law, end of quote. French President Macron said that, and I quote, Azerbaijani armed forces have crossed into Armenian territory. They must withdraw immediately, end of quote. The list goes on. At the outset of such attacks, Armenia deemed it necessary to lay landmines within its territory for military defense purposes. Further, as you will see at paragraph 2 of tab 2 of your judge's folder, the Armenian Minister of Defense has concluded that the, and I quote, landmines displayed in the photographs provided to the court by the Azerbaijani government were taken by Azerbaijan from the sovereign territories of Armenia in the course of the aggression in 2021-2022, end of quote. Likewise, the Armenian Minister of Foreign Affairs stated last November, before Azerbaijan filed this request, the following, and I quote, it's on your screen, regarding Azerbaijan's declarations that the Armenian side has placed Armenian-made mines in Nagorno-Karabakh, I must underline that the mines displayed by Azerbaijan were found not in Nagorno-Karabakh, but in the sovereign territories of Armenia occupied in 2021-22, and they now are trying to use these mines for propaganda purposes. It is indeed notable that the photographs Azerbaijan has presented to the court typically show either a close-up of a landmine or landmines laid out in neat columns and rows. There are just 3 photographs that purport to show the clearing of a minefield, the location of which is not specified. Further, there is no statement from, for example, a combat engineer addressing how the landmines were removed without detonating them, or where exactly they were located when he or she removed them. There's nothing explaining how and why the landmines were transported by Azerbaijan from the alleged minefield to another location so as to be laid out in those neat columns and rose. It is, of course, difficult for Armenia to prove to the court that Azerbaijan removed these landmines from Armenian territory. Armenia does not control the territory from which the landmines were taken, nor does it have access to information held only by Azerbaijan. And it's difficult for the Ministry of Defense to provide you with information beyond what you find at tab 2, given the sensitivities of such information in a situation involving armed conflict and occupation. At the same time, and to be candid, Madam President, it may be difficult for the court to agree with Armenia that the landmines in Azerbaijan's photographs were taken from Armenia, given the lack of evidence before you on that point beyond the clear and unequivocal position of the Armenian government expressed well before Azerbaijan submitted the request. So allow me to turn instead to the story that Azerbaijan tells the court, which under close scrutiny simply falls apart. And because it falls apart, I respectfully submit that the court should once again, as it did in December 2021, feel compelled to reject Azerbaijan's request. Madam President, Azerbaijan's story begins with a broad and vague assertion that Armenian armed forces deliberately continued to lay landmines in or after 2021 in civilian zones, and indeed planted such landmines for no conceivable military purpose and in unequivocally civilian areas. When exactly this happened, by what exact means, and by who exactly are all left very unclear. The overall geographic context is important when scrutinizing Azerbaijan's story. To understand the context, perhaps a good place to start is the end of the 44-day war, the trilateral statement, and the map on your screen. The trilateral statement of November 2020 provided that 3 districts formerly under the control of the Republic of Artsakh be returned to Azerbaijan. The Kalbajar district, referred to on this map as the Kalbajar region, was to be returned by 15 November 2020. The deadline for doing so was extended to 25 November, and it was returned to Azerbaijan's control by that date. The Agdam district, shown on this map as the Agdam region, was to be returned by 20 November 2020, and it was returned to Azerbaijan's control by that date. The Lachen district, shown on this map as the Lachen region, was to be returned by 1 December 2020, and it was returned to Azerbaijan's control by that date. There is no evidence before the court to the contrary. Rather, all relevant sources indicate that these districts were returned to Azerbaijan in late 2020. The only caveat is that the Russian peacekeepers were deployed into a relatively small portion of the Lachen district that we refer to as the Lachin Corridor. So when Azerbaijan says to the court in broad terms that starting 5 months ago, it discovered more than approximately 2,700 landmines in the Kalbajar and Lachin districts, which is its central claim in this request, it is saying that it has discovered landmines in districts over which it has had control since the end of 2020. Yet how anyone, including Armenian armed forces, were somehow able to surreptitiously enter such districts so as to transport and lay landmines on such a scale in supposedly civilian areas right under the nose of Azerbaijan is quite the mystery. That alone casts grave doubt upon the overall story that Azerbaijan is spinning before you. Another fact that does not sit well with Azerbaijan's story is the following. Other than withdrawing from these 3 districts by those specific dates, the trilateral statement did not require Armenian armed forces to withdraw from their locations on 10 November 2020. Rather, the parties to the conflict agreed to stop in their current positions, with the withdrawal of Armenian armed forces only occurring later. Nor did the trilateral statement say anything about a withdrawal or demobilization of the Nagorno-Karabakh Defense Army. Thus, after the 44-day war, there remained armed forces in Nagorno-Karabakh and Azerbaijan armed forces on the perimeter of Nagorno-Karabakh. Indeed, under the trilateral statement, the Russian peacekeeping contingent was to be deployed not just in the Lachin Corridor, but also along the line of contact in Nagorno-Karabakh between these armed forces. So, what we had after the end of the 44-day war was a contact line along the perimeter of Nagorno-Karabakh at which were positioned opposing military forces. Further, the trilateral statement called for a ceasefire and termination of hostilities, but it did not preclude armed forces from taking whatever other steps they deemed necessary to hold their positions. Madam President, if any landmines were laid along the contact line, those landmines were laid for defensive purposes, just as they had been so laid along the line of contact resulting after the First Nagorno-Karabakh War. Such landmines would have nothing to do with an effort to harm civilians. As I previously noted, Azerbaijan claims that starting in August 2022, it found more than approximately 2,700 landmines. Of those, it claims that over half of these landmines, specifically 1,614 landmines, were found near 3 villages, which Azerbaijan says are unequivocally civilian areas. So right at the start, we have an interesting concession from Azerbaijan, which is that some 40% of the approximately 2,700 landmines supposedly found in Azerbaijan since last August were not in unequivocally civilian areas. Now, in assessing the claim that approximately 2,700 landmines have been found since August 2022, of which only 60% were purportedly found in unequivocally civilian areas, the timing, the circumstances, and the location of these alleged discoveries merit close scrutiny. I start with the issue of timing. August 2022 is not just a random month. Rather, it is a month when Azerbaijan launched what it called Operation Revenge. In that operation, Azerbaijan violated the trilateral statement by using its armed forces to breach the contact line so as to seize partial control of Nagorno-Karabakh. Specifically, Azerbaijan seized control of certain strategic military positions, including those on and around Sarababa Mountain or Ridge, which you can find now on your screen. The left side of the screen shows a map of the entire region. The gray-toned area in the center of that map is the area under the control of Nagorno-Karabakh. If you trace the line along the western edge of Nagorno-Karabakh heading southward, the first annotation you find is Sarababa. This is where Sarababa Mountain or Ridge is located, and we've provided a close-up of this portion of the map on the right side of the screen. The Sarababa Ridge is one of a number of dominant heights along the Karabakh Ridge of the Little Caucasus mountain range. If you turn to tab 3 of your judges' folders, you will find the August 3rd, 2022 information bulletin issued by the Russian Ministry of Defense regarding its peacekeeping activities. Azerbaijan's unlawful seizure of the Sarababa Ridge is readily apparent from this information bulletin, which says at paragraph 3 that, and I quote, "In the area of the height of Sarababa, the ceasefire regime was violated by the armed forces of Azerbaijan." End of quote. At tab 4 of your judges folder, you will find the information bulletin for the next day, August 4th, which refers to the line of contact. That's at paragraph 3, and reports that as a result of Azerbaijan's operation, there were at least 2 deaths and 14 injured of the Nagorno-Karabakh armed forces. Madam President, counsel for Azerbaijan this morning attempted to pretend that there no longer exists a contact line separating armed forces and that the contact line somehow disappeared in late 2020. But the peacekeepers' bulletins tell a very different story. Further, the situation of August 3rd, 2022 was reported at the time by Azerbaijan as a military operation. I invite you to turn to tab 5 of your judges folder, which contains the statement issued on August 3rd by the Azerbaijan Ministry of Defense. Here, the Azerbaijan Ministry of Defense stated that Armenian armed groups tried to seize certain heights so as to establish new combat positions. But as a result of the retaliatory Operation Revenge, units of the Azerbaijan army seized control of Sarababa and a number of other important commanding heights along the Karabakh Ridge of the Little Caucasus mountain system. Moreover, the ministry said that the Azerbaijan army destroyed several combat positions of illegal Armenian armed elements, even carrying out an airstrike, killing Armenian militants and destroying their howitzers, their military vehicles, their ammunition. Azerbaijani President Aliyev himself later said the operation was in the exercise of his role as commander-in-chief. And it is in the days after this Azerbaijani military operation, which seized important commanding heights along the Karabakh Ridge, that Azerbaijan announced it had discovered landmines. Indeed, the Azerbaijani Ministry of Defense on August 16, 2022, issued a press release stating that the Azerbaijan army had discovered an anti-personnel minefield in the northwestern direction of Sarababa Hill. Yet there's no mention at all in that press release of these landmines being located in or near a civilian settlement. Azerbaijan's assertion that it was provoked by enemy forces into exacting revenge convinced no one, most notably the Russian peacekeepers. But the key point is, on any account, in August 2022, there were military operations by military forces to seize strategic heights from other military forces along the mountainous ridges that included Sarababa Mountain. And having seized these strategic heights, this is the point in time when suddenly Azerbaijan says it has found lots of landmines. In fact, of the 1,614 landmines supposedly found in unequivocally civilian areas, 80% are found in August, just after Azerbaijan crossed the line of contact and seized territory. In its request, Azerbaijan presents to you photographs of landmines laid out in neat rows and columns. Those photographs are inescapably associated with Azerbaijan's seizure of Sarababa Ridge. Indeed, the press release the Azerbaijani Ministry of Defense issued on August 16, 2022 about the seizure of Sarababa included the photograph that you now see on your screen. If that photograph looks familiar, it's because Azerbaijan presents it to you now at page 9 of its Annex 10 as evidence of alleged laying of landmines by Armenia in civilian areas. In other words, back in August 2022, these mines are the spoils of a successful military operation. Today, they're evidence of laying of landmines in unequivocally civilian areas. All evidence contemporaneous to August 2022 points to landmines in this location being a consequence of military operations. The Caspian News on August 17, 2022, published virtually the exact same photograph as appears at Figure 2 on page 12 of Azerbaijan's request. The relevant Figure 2 photograph from that request now appears on the screen. When describing this scene, the Caspian News reported that, and I'll quote, "The armed forces of Azerbaijan discovered a minefield in the northwestern direction of the recently liberated Sarababa high ground," end of quote. Moreover, the Caspian News reported that, again I'll quote, "the mined area was within the perimeter of the temporary monitoring zone of the Russian peacekeepers in Azerbaijan," end of quote. In other words, these landmines were purportedly discovered along the contact line between military forces. As such, these landmines have nothing, absolutely nothing to do with targeting of civilians. Indeed, the August 2022 Caspian News report says nothing about laying landmines in a civilian area. And that's true of the other August 2022 news reports relating to the alleged finding of landmines. The lack of any reference in August 2022 to the laying of landmines in civilian areas makes sense when you look at all the related photographs of these landmines. Let's start with the photograph from Figure 2 of Azerbaijan's request, which is still on your screen. Notice the countryside in the background. It's clearly showing an open and barren area with no civilian structures of any kind in the background. Let's take a look at a different photograph found in an article published by an Azerbaijani news agency called News AZ from this past November, which is entitled "Foreign Military Attachés in Azerbaijan to Inspect Minefield Set Up by Armenia in Sarababa High Ground." This same photograph in black and white appears in Azerbaijan's evidence at Annex 8. As you can see, it's a mountainous area with no civilian activity in sight. A different angle of this same scene appeared in an article by the Azerbaijani news agency Azer News from November 2022, which is entitled "Russian-Turkish Military Observers Inspect Minefield in Sarababa Peak." From this angle, we get a pretty good look at the overall terrain, which is quite mountainous, as one would expect, and completely devoid of civilians or civilian structures. Actually, all of the photographs presented by Azerbaijan relating to landmines show locations that are devoid of villages or structures of any kind. How Azerbaijan can regard these photographs as demonstrating the laying of landmines in civilian areas is yet another mystery. Needless to say, if there are no civilians around in the places where landmines are laid, then it's rather hard to argue that any such landmines are targeting civilians, let alone civilians of a particular ethnicity. If this is ethnic cleansing, it's of a type never seen before. Azerbaijan's map evidence, when you look closely, tells the same story. Rather than minefields to be found scattered across Kalbajar and Lachin districts, The minefields identified are all at or proximate to lines of contact. On your screen now is the map contained in Annex 9 of Azerbaijan's request, with a small annotation by us at the lower right indicating the location of the old Lachin corridor. Counsel for Azerbaijan this morning assiduously avoided showing you this map, perhaps because they belatedly realized how damaging it is to their request. In any event, Azerbaijan presented this map supposedly to show 7 locations of minefields laid by Armenian armed forces in the Republic of Azerbaijan's territory. Now, none of these locations, as you can see, are located in the Lachin corridor. This slide is rather crowded to read, so let me take you to the portion of the slide identifying minefields at locations numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, this part of the map is similar to the map Azerbaijan showed you this morning from its Annex 28, Appendix A, although that map strips out the annotations that you find on this map. You see here 4 locations of alleged minefields. They are all along the contact line between the Azerbaijani forces and the forces of Nagorno-Karabakh, the latter area shown in the darker tone on the right of your screen. Let's start with the bottom location. We're told from the annotation that the minefield associated with number 4 was supposedly found in August 2022. If you follow the arrow across the map, it lands you at a location labeled as Sarababa M. This is the same Sarababa mountain or ridge that I mentioned before, the one that Azerbaijan seized in combat in August 2022. Who, are we told by this annotation, was harmed by a landmine there? A military serviceman, not a civilian. Indeed, the annotations on this map refer exclusively to servicemen, not civilians. Notice that the map depicts also in this vicinity a village named Ikinci Ipak, which the annotation for number 4 says is found in the Lachin district. In other words, in an area that was returned to Azerbaijan as of December 2020. This is one of the 3 villages that Azerbaijan highlights in its request, saying that 1,614 landmines were found near the 3 villages and thus in unequivocally civilian areas. Yet when Azerbaijan says that the landmines were laid near Ikinci Ipak, it is referring to this area of Sarababa mountain, which is along the line of contact. Indeed, Azerbaijan never says in its request that it found a minefield in one of the 3 villages or even around one of the 3 villages. Rather, it consistently says near a village. And when you read Azerbaijan's evidence closely, in this instance, Azerbaijan says it found the minefield 1.8 kilometers to the east of Ikinci Ipak village. Indeed, notice on this map, the geographic coordinates for the minefield indicated at the number 4 annotation are completely different from the geographic coordinates appearing just below Ikinci Ipak village. As an aside, I note that this method of geographic coordinates dates back to the era of the Soviet Union. In essence, prior to Azerbaijan's Operation Revenge, Azerbaijan's evidence essentially indicates that there were armed forces on the Sarababa Ridge protecting Nagorno-Karabakh. There was a minefield somewhere on the slope of the ridge for defensive purposes. The Azerbaijan army was controlling the base of the ridge at the edge of the Lachen district. And behind the Azerbaijan army, there was the Ikinci Ipak village. Once the Azerbaijan army, in August of 2022, seizes the ridge, it dug up the mines located on the slope. Moreover, if you look at a table that Azerbaijan presents at Annex 7 of its request, and specifically at page 4 of that table, you see an interesting fact. Of the 1,614 landmines that Azerbaijan says were found near 3 villages, all but five of those landmines were found in this location, in the so-called area of this village. In other words, of the landmines supposedly laid in unequivocally civilian areas, 99% of them are located here. Thus, the heart of Azerbaijan's entire request relating to landmines relates to this single location, at and along the Sarababa Ridge, and to the discovery of landmines after Azerbaijan's military forcefully seized the ridge in August of 2022. Now let's turn to the minefield associated with number 3 on the map, which is immediately to the north of the minefield I just discussed, and which was also, according to the annotation, found in August of 2022. The annotation for this number 3 says the minefield was discovered by the Azerbaijan military. The annotation makes no reference to civilian harm. Further, it says the minefield is in the direction of Birinci Ipak village, which again, the notation says is in the Lachen district, and thus in an area that has been under Azerbaijan's control since December of 2020. This is the second village that Azerbaijan highlights in its request, and Azerbaijan asserts that just 50 persons used to live in these 2 villages. Now, for this village of Birinci Ipak, again notice that the geographic coordinates given for the minefield are completely different from those given for the village. We estimate that this village is 2.4 kilometers from the minefield that Azerbaijan asserts that it found. Moreover, while the annotation on this map for number 3 indicates that mines were found in the direction of Birinci Ipak village, the table that Azerbaijan presents in Annex 7 contains no listing for landmines found in the area of this village. This further demonstrates that the alleged minefield is not actually associated with the village, with a village. On this map, the minefield is in the direction of Birinci Ipak village, but on Azerbaijan's Annex 7 table, there are no mines in the area of this village. Now please turn to the minefield associated with number 5 on Azerbaijan's map. This minefield apparently was also found in August of 2022 and is described as being southeast of a mountain. There's no reference to a civilian settlement in the annotation. Who found these landmines? Military servicemen. What types of mines were they? They included anti-tank mines. As the court's no doubt aware, anti-tank mines do not detonate when stepped on by a person. They only detonate when something heavy, like a tank, weighs down on the landmine. So one might ask, why would armed forces go to the trouble of laying anti-tank mines for the purpose of harming villagers? Now consider the minefield purportedly associated with number 2, which we are told by the annotation was also found in August of 2022. It's described as being on nameless heights, which certainly does not sound like a civilian settlement. The only harm indicated was to a military person, not a civilian. From the table at Azerbaijan's Annex 7, we learn that a total of 5 mines make up this minefield. Although it's not shown on this map, Azerbaijan's other evidence places the third village that Azerbaijan highlights, the Balipaya village, to the south of these nameless heights. We estimate that this village is 2.5 kilometers from the minefield that Azerbaijan asserts it found. So, these 4 minefields and the 3 villages near some of them were all found along the line of contact on a series of mountainous ridges separating opposing military forces. Madam President, Azerbaijan does not emphasize the final locations from this Annex 9 map of minefields. But it may be helpful for the court to briefly consider these other locations, as this map is definitely showing minefields along lines of contact between opposing military forces. So here again is an enlarged portion of Azerbaijan's Annex 9 map, this time showing alleged minefields at locations numbers 1, number 6, and number 7. All these locations are at or near the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Numbers 6 and 7 are places where there have been active hostilities between Armenia and Azerbaijan since the end of the 44-day war, while number 1 is a place where only 4 mines were found. In short, all the evidence before you, whether it's in the form of reports, photographs, maps, or otherwise, demonstrates that if any landmines were laid in the areas as claimed by Azerbaijan, they were laid between opposing forces for defensive purposes along the strategic heights of the contact line or along an international border, and were not laid in civilian areas. Thus, they were not laid for any reason related to the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. Madam President, aside from the fact that laying landmines for purposes of military defense is not unlawful, we note the lack of any attribution of conduct here to Armenia. If Azerbaijan's position is that the NKR or its army laid these landmines, we respond that with respect to the time period at issue in this request, Armenia does not exercise control over either the NKR or its army, and there is no evidence before the court to suggest otherwise. Further, there's no evidence that the Republic of Armenia, in this time period, instructed or directed the NKR or its army to lay the particular minefields asserted by Azerbaijan. Moreover, since the end of the 44-day war, Armenia has not provided any armaments or ammunition to Nagorno-Karabakh. The Cherigov case referred to this morning, which was issued in 2015, and which was applying a jurisdictional standard, not a standard of attribution, says nothing to the contrary. As such, any NKR conduct in this regard cannot be attributed to Armenia. So, to conclude on the issue of landmines, no doubt there were incidents of civilians on all sides who have been hurt by landmines, as suggested by the injuries to the telecommunications workers recounted in Azerbaijan's Annex 25. Of course, everyone, including the government of Armenia, regrets such incidental harm, but those accounts of harm are endemic across the region, a product of mines laid by many actors, including the government of Azerbaijan, in many places for defensive purposes over a period of 30 years. Madam President, members of the court, allow me to turn to the issue of booby traps. First, the location of these alleged booby traps is very different than that of the alleged minefields. Azerbaijan's counsel this morning tended to conflate the issue of minefields and booby traps, but these two matters are occurring in entirely different places. The alleged minefields are located exclusively outside the Lachin corridor, while the alleged booby traps were supposedly found solely within the old Lachin corridor. As the court knows, the trilateral statement provided that a new road would be built connecting Nagorno-Karabakh to Armenia. Once completed, the Russian peacekeepers relocated from the old Lachin corridor to the new road, and Azerbaijan was allowed to take control of certain settlements that were within the old Lachin corridor, notably the town of Birdzor, or Lachin, and the villages of Ahravno, or Zabuk, and Sus. Yesterday, multiple counsel for Azerbaijan insisted strenuously that the Lachin corridor is under the exclusive control of the Russian peacekeeping contingent. But today, Azerbaijan's claim is that the Armenian armed forces somehow deployed into the Lachin corridor to set booby traps without any detection by the Russian peacekeeping contingent. There's simply no evidence of this happening. Certainly, there's nothing in the bulletins issued by the peacekeeping contingent indicating anything of that nature. And equally certain, this is not Armenian territory, such that any reference to the Corfu Channel case is quite misplaced. Second, and to be absolutely clear, Armenia denies setting any booby traps in civilian homes or settlements. The armed forces of Armenia do not use booby traps. As you can see at tab 2 of your folder, in the final paragraph, the Armenian Minister of Defense confirms that such devices are too unpredictable and ineffective for military operations, and depending on their use, may not be consistent with international humanitarian law, a position fully consistent with that taken by the ICRC. Third, there's simply no evidence before the court that the armed forces of Armenia somehow, despite the presence of the Russian peacekeepers, trained or otherwise controlled others in the Lachen corridor so as to set booby traps. As such, any reference to the Nicaragua versus United States case is misguided. Nor is there any evidence that the armed forces of Armenia supplied others in this regard. Indeed, the munitions shown in Azerbaijan's photographs are mostly not of the type used by Armenian armed forces. So to answer my good friend Mr. Lowe's simple question of this morning as to why the governor of Armenia doesn't tell Azerbaijan where any booby traps are located, our simple answer is that we didn't have anything to do with such booby traps. Fourth, booby traps can be set by anyone with munitions experience. Most males in this region have military experience, even if they're not on active duty. Moreover, persons forced to flee from their homes might well set a booby trap, particularly if motivated by anger and nothing else. Recall that Azerbaijan's President Aliyev explicitly demanded that Armenians leave these settlements. We know that at least a few such persons set fire to their homes before fleeing, as Azerbaijan's own evidence demonstrates. At the same time, these acts of destruction to homes were actively discouraged by Armenian and Nagorno-Karabakh authorities. Fifth, the very few photographs presented by Azerbaijan of these booby traps tell their own story. These booby traps clearly are not professionally done. They're crude, ad hoc, irregular, unsophisticated, and jerry-rigged contraptions of what appear to be rusty and dated parts. Any professional army seeking to set explosives would certainly not do it in this way. Rather, these contraptions have all the hallmarks of angry lone wolves concocting self-made devices. And in terms of the number of booby traps, other than what's in its few photographs, Azerbaijan never actually provides a number of booby traps allegedly found, instead preferring, particularly in its Annex 22, to conflate the issue with the finding of unexploded remnants of war, whether in the form of ordnance or otherwise. Finally, even Azerbaijan does not know who set the booby traps of which it complains. Its position is that because these traps were constructed with military equipment, they must have been planted by or with the cooperation of Armenia's armed forces. Well, actually, in a region that has experienced numerous armed conflicts over some 3 decades, there's quite a bit of military equipment lying around and plenty of persons who know how to use it. such that it does not make sense to say that only Armenia is able to do this. And it's certainly not a sufficient basis for attributing responsibility to a state for a very serious charge. In short, Azerbaijan's accusations in this respect consist simply of fragments of evidence augmented by conjecture, piled on top of supposition, and should therefore not be accepted by the court. Before concluding, Madam President, I wish to make a last observation about whether the facts Azerbaijan has placed before you are really new, as insisted this morning by counsel for Azerbaijan and as required under your rules. While Azerbaijan represents to the court that it recently located minefields, Azerbaijan's own evidence reflects that out of the approximately 2,700 landmines that were allegedly discovered since August 2022, approximately 86% of them were in fact discovered in August and September, meaning more than 4 months ago. In short, not so recent. Moreover, Azerbaijan's letter to Armenia of September 15, 2022, and Azerbaijan's letter to the court of September 22, 2022, characterized the discovery of these minefields as a violation of the court's December 2021 order. In other words, Azerbaijan maintained that the laying of these alleged minefields, purportedly of landmines manufactured in 2021, was already a matter addressed in your December 2021 order, which means that they are not new facts that allow for a fresh request for provisional measures of protection. And in saying that last September, Azerbaijan did not reserve any rights to pursue a new request. To the same effect, in its recent memorial, which counsel referred to this morning, and even placed evidence from it on the screen, in that memorial, Azerbaijan extensively discusses the alleged laying of these landmines starting in August of 2022 and continuing to this day as a breach of your existing order and as pertinent to the merits phase, not as new facts meriting attention by this court on a preliminary basis. Azerbaijan cannot have it both ways. And much of the evidence that Azerbaijan places before you today relates to matters long past. Many of the faces that you see in Azerbaijan's Annex 23 are the same faces that you saw in Annex 37 of Azerbaijan's first request for provisional measures filed in September 2021. Those photos at Azerbaijan's Annex 24 in this request of property damage in the Lachin Quarter appear to be mostly war-related damage from significant military operations long past, not from recent booby traps or even mines. In short, Azerbaijan is, to some extent, repackaging old information for this request. Madam President, members of the court, I close by noting that on Armenia's own evidence, Azerbaijan's own evidence, Armenia supposedly engaged in indiscriminate use of mines and indiscriminately planted landmines and indiscriminately deployed mines If so, then it would suggest that Armenia did not engage in an act of discrimination within the meaning of the CERD. But importantly, Armenia did nothing of this kind. Armenia only planted landmines in its own territory for self-defense. But even if landmines were laid as Azerbaijan would have it, any such conduct by whoever did it, from all the evidence before you, would only have been done as a defensive measure undertaken along borders or lines of contact and without any purpose of harming persons of a particular ethnic origin. And who laid crude booby traps within the Lachin Quarter is a question that even Azerbaijan cannot answer. All told, these facts simply provide no basis for the request Azerbaijan has placed before you. Finally, for the sake of completeness, I recall that in the aftermath of the 44-day war, Armenia handed over to Azerbaijan any maps in its possession relating to minefields that were not in Armenia. And because Armenia is not withholding maps, and because it is only laying mines for defensive purposes, and because it has no connection to booby traps, Azerbaijan's request is clearly moot and presents no issue of urgency. Madam President, I thank you for your attention. I ask that you now call upon Professor Kolb to continue Armenia's presentation.
I thank Professor Murphy for his statement, and I now invite Professor Robert Kolb to take the floor. You have the floor, Professor.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam President, distinguished members of the Court, this afternoon I'll be talking to you about the plausibility of rights as a condition for the indication of provisional measures. To be quite frank with you, I did wonder what I could shed light on for you, because the question that we are dealing with here is so crystal clear. Is there any doubt as to the non-plausibility of the rights invoked by Azerbaijan? Certainly not. Can one question whether the rights put forward by Azerbaijan are linked to the jurisdiction of the court? Certainly not. You have already decided so. Notwithstanding this, Azerbaijan persists in its desperate strategy of mirror reactions. I could leave it at that. But you are expecting from me a demonstration, which I will now give to you. The facts surrounding the laying of Armenian landmines and booby traps have been recalled by Professor Sean Murphy. I can rely on his demonstration without any need to go back over it. Legal analysis in the coming minutes will confront us with a dogged duality. On the one hand, the invoked rights do not exist in international law applicable here. It is more than just a lack of plausibility. It's a veritable inexistence thereof. On the other hand, if we assume, for the sake of argument, that such rights exist, they manifestly do not stem from CERD. That goes to show they fall completely outside the jurisdiction in this case. Both grounds are enough to dismiss the application for provisional measures relating to landmines. What are the conclusions drawn by our learned friends? We can summarize them as two propositions. Firstly, laying landmines contravenes CERD because they target primarily Azerbaijani nationals. Secondly, given the danger caused by these landmines, Armenia must refrain from laying any and must inform Azerbaijan of their location. In international law, there is no prohibition on the use of landmines. In this sense, the purported right does not exist. And what is even more true, it's not plausible. What is the legal baseline for our consideration of the following aspects? I will start with the accusation of intentional and willful discrimination. The court does not need me to tell it that the geographical area that we're dealing with has witnessed acts of belligerence of significant magnitude and gravity. Nor do I need to stress the fact that Azerbaijan has initiated large-scale military offensives. In this context, the party that is pushed into a corner and has to defend itself often resorts to the laying of landmines. These serve ictu oculi to slow down the progression of the enemy. It's reasonable to infer that the laying of landmines was carried out in line with military requirements. In this context, no other allegation would be plausible. Landmines were found in areas where there were military operations of which Azerbaijan boasts. I put it to you, is it so surprising to discover mines in areas that the defensive state knows is in danger? Where else should it have placed the mines, assuming its expectations of military effectiveness? In Yerevan? It seems to me that the balance is well calibrated for military use and not for civil persecution. Nonetheless, Azerbaijan contends that Armenia allegedly laid the landmines after it had left the territories at issue. Allegedly, it laid them simply for the purpose of discrimination, out of animosity, hostility, resentment. My colleague Sean Murphy has shown to you that, on the contrary, these devices came from contact areas and had been laid for defensive purposes. Arguendo that there's any doubt, evidence should, of course, satisfy the inevitable test. Even at the stage of provisional measures, allegations concerning the shameful, unlawful acts or the acts that are grave and malicious have to be founded in evidence that is strict and certain. Do you see them anywhere here? Azerbaijan has been quite simply making claims and insinuations. I find nothing other than assertions that are discredited by the location of the landmines concerned. When I say location, I mean that the mines have been found outside villages and centres of population. They've been placed between the lines of contact. For this reason, their victims were primarily soldiers. All in all, we have far less than plausibility here. Let us now turn to the specifics of landmines. A mine is a weapon, the effect of which is intrinsically indiscriminate. It explodes when pressure is brought to bear on it, and not when it comes up against a racial feature. This simple fact is prima facie the opposite of any idea of discrimination. We're pretty much in the archetypical domain of indiscrimination. It's not a surprise that the victims of landmines in the theatre of war between Armenia and Azerbaijan on a regular basis were people of different national and ethnic groups. It has to be acknowledged, it's extremely hard to turn landmines into targeted discriminatory devices. Let's take another angle. Think about what it would mean if you were to start to embark upon evaluations related to the third approach for any military operation in an armed conflict. Shelling the enemy causes collateral damage in the civilian population. So it's not just affecting the enemy camp? Well, in that case, is it not discriminatory? Potentially, could CERD turn it into an internationally wrongful act? Landmines are laid in areas where enemy breakthrough is expected. So are they not hitting in the main the enemy? That means that their laying is perhaps discriminatory. Can CERD plausibly convert this into an international crime? Pretty well all military operations and their related actions are, within this meaning, discriminatory. Does that mean that prima facie they fall within the scope of CERD? I do not believe that states would tolerate any such interpretation of the law. And I am sure that that is not your interpretation either. Specific additional elements are required in order to give credibility to discrimination within the meaning of CERD. What I have just said also disposes of our learned friend's arguments as to the effects, and I refer to paragraph 35 of the application, where it says that even if the purpose of actions is not discriminatory, it is enough for them to have discriminatory effect. This interpretation fails to recognize the text of Article 1, Paragraph 1 of CERD, which requires not just a discriminatory effect, but also that a distinction be drawn on the basis of race, colour, descent, or national or ethnic origin. Any such distinction has not been made in this instance. If a discriminatory effect were to be enough, the words that I have just quoted would be entirely superfluous. I do not believe that it would be legally correct to deprive them of their effet utile. What is more, if the version of our learned friends were correct, then Qatar versus United Arab Emirates would have continued to the merit stage. The effects doctrine is admittedly not applicable when a measure is based on a purpose and an effect that is recognized in international law. That is the case of military advantage in armed conflict. Were it to be otherwise, pretty well any act related to military operations would constitute a potential or actual breach of CERD. We would end up with a clearly absurd and unreasonable result. It is not admissible that we grant the effects doctrine such an immeasurably broad scope. Rather, I have the impression that our learned friends are using it at best as a panacea and at worst as a tabula in naufragio. As demonstrated by my colleague Sean Murphy, there is no new fact and no fact of racial discrimination. There were military operations, offensive by one party, defensive by the other. Any attempt to bring the avatars of those operations into the domain of CERD is both artificial and vain. The same arguments are being rolled out time and again to the same ends. But they are no more credible today than they were yesterday. There is no reason for you to depart from what you indicated in the order of the 7th of December 2021. The conclusions to be drawn are obvious. The invoked rights are both inexistent, as international law does not prohibit the laying of landmines, and not related to CERD, but to military operations, which means that they are not plausible. The two provisional measures sought are not based on any source of international law containing obligations on Armenia in the areas at issue. I've already said that international law contains no general rule prohibiting the use of landmines. Any obligation to abstain is therefore clearly not covered by CERD. So the request before you is tantamount to saying that the court should rule by creating a new obligation on Armenia. This request, together with that for the first provisional measures, somewhat sneakily presumes that any laying of landmines in the future would be a fact of racial discrimination. How could the court rely on such a malicious assumption? The law invoked, the right invoked, is not plausible. It is baseless in applicable law. And again, Azerbaijan is asking Armenia to inform it as to the location of the landmines that have already been laid. General international law contains no such obligation. If one had to give the location of landmines, the latter would lose a significant part of their military usefulness. Nor does CERD contain any such obligation, nor do the texts of international law on mines. What is more, Armenia has given to Azerbaijan the information in its possession on the location of landmines. In this way, it has gone above and beyond its legal obligations. Once again, we see that the invoked right for information is not based in international law, which is applicable here. We see that the opposing party is asking the court to create new obligations on Armenia, and that the right put forward is not plausible. What is more, neither the laying of landmines nor information concerning their location are questions linked or related to SERD. They're to do with the conduct of hostilities and use post bellum. We come back again to the same two-edged sword, a non-existent right, a putative right that's not linked to SERD. The inevitable conclusion is unrelenting in its clarity. None of the rights invoked are in the slightest bit plausible. What is more, there is no link between the measures sought and any right that would be ostensibly plausible under SERD. The provisional measures sought must be dismissed for that reason alone. I come now to a final aspect. The opposing party claimed this morning that the elementary considerations of humanity would oblige Armenia to reveal the location of landmines. It relied on the Corfu Strait 1949 case and Nicaragua from 1986. I'd like to draw your attention to the decisive legal differences between those precedents and this case. First of all, those cases were settled on the basis of customary international law. The court's jurisdiction does not extend thereto in this case. Secondly, the court's recitals on information in these cases targeted primarily the protection of shipping rights. That's not the case here. Thirdly, the previous cases were based on the fact that the state concerned knew where the mines were to be found, which has not been demonstrated here. Fourthly, Protocol 2 from 1996 to the Convention on Certain Classical Weapons in Article 9, Paragraph 2 says that the obligation to inform does not exist when the zones concerned are under the control of the opposing party. Positive law, therefore, says there is no general right, obligation to inform. And our learned friends attempted to grant a further scope, which cannot be accorded. These reflections bring me to the end of my oral pleading. I'd like to thank you for your kind attention. And I would ask you, Madam President, to call upon Professor Pierre D'Argent.
I thank Professor Kolb, and I now invite Professor Pierre D'Argent to address the court. You have the floor, Professor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Yes, thanks, Madam President. Madam President, distinguished members of the Court. Azerbaijan's request for provisional measures is lacking both in facts and law, but it is also highly problematic in two respects. Firstly, this request is based on a fundamentally incorrect reading of paragraph 53 of your second order of 7 December 2021. And, on the other hand, those measures requested by Azerbaijan are fraught with such defects that they cannot possibly be ordered. Following on the reflections of my colleague Professor Cole regarding the plausibility of the rights whose protection is requested. Let me start by my first point. Azerbaijan has only managed to submit to you a new request for provisional measures by doing violence to the terms of the 2021 order in that case, by which you dismissed a similar request regarding landmines. Indeed, the new request is entirely based on a flawed reading of paragraph 53 of your second order of 7 December 2021. Now, this paragraph, just to recall it to you, is divided into 4 sentences. The first of these sentences you can see on screen. There, the court summarises Azerbaijan's line of argument, whereby I quote, Armenia's alleged conduct in relation to landmines is part of a long-standing campaign of ethnic cleansing, end of quotation. The second and third sentences then set out the legal position of the court on this question. Second sentence. The court recognises that the policy of driving persons of a certain national or ethnic origin from a particular area, as well as preventing their return thereto, can implicate rights under CERD, and that such a policy can be effected through a variety of military means. Right, the third sentence then. However, the court does not consider that CERD plausibly imposes any obligation on Armenia to take measures to enable Azerbaijan to undertake demining or to cease and desist from planting landmines. Now, you will note, distinguished members of the court, that these 2 sentences are wholly legal in content and they form a whole. They're linked between themselves by the however, cependant in French, used here as a conjunction, not as a temporal adverb. And this conjunction indicates that the third sentence adds clarification to the position of principle expressed in the second sentence. Now, though not authoritative, the English version of the order expresses exactly the same linkage using however, French cependant. Thus, the assertion contained in the third sentence is also a position of principle. The Convention does not plausibly impose any obligation on Armenia in terms of planting or clearing mines. The 2 phrases, the 2 sentences taken together mean that though, I quote again, a policy of driving persons of a certain national or ethnic origin from a particular area, as well as preventing their return thereto, can implicate rights under CERD, and that such a policy can be effected through a variety of means, end of citation, it nonetheless remains that the Convention does not, and I quote again, plausibly impose any obligation on Armenia to take measures to enable Azerbaijan to undertake demining or to cease and desist from planting landmines. The fourth sentence of paragraph 53 constitutes subsequently a factual finding to be added to the legal positions expressed by the court in the 2 preceding sentences. I'm quoting again. Azerbaijan has not placed before the court evidence indicating that Armenia's alleged conduct with respect to landmines has the purpose or effect of nullifying or impairing the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise on an equal footing of rights of persons of Azerbaijani national ethnic origin. So, this finding is made for the sake of completeness by the court. Thus, the 4th sentence could have started, well, whatever the case, or in any case, or moreover, the factual finding of Azerbaijan's evidential deficiency changes not a whit the legal position set out very clearly by the 2nd and 3rd sentences. Taken together, the four sentences of paragraph 53 thus must be taken to mean that even were it established, which wasn't the case in 2021 and certainly isn't the case today any more so, that even if it were established that land mining operations were conducted with a view to drive persons of a certain national or ethnic origin from a particular area or to prevent their return, and that thereby the rights guaranteed by the CERD could be implicated, one could not, however, infer from the Convention any form of obligation to definitively cease mining operations or to assist Azerbaijan in mine clearance. Madam President, distinguished members of the Court, Azerbaijan appears to have accepted the teaching of paragraph 53 of the Order of 2021, had done so until quite recently. Indeed, in its letter to Armenia dated 15 September 2022 and in a letter addressed to the court 1 week later on 22 September 2022, relying on exactly the same facts as those underpinning its new request for provisional measures, Azerbaijan has inferred some sort of purported breach of the obligation to not aggravate the dispute, which is an obligation prescribed by your second order of 7 December 2021. Now, Azerbaijan could have, as it is doing now, claimed that there were grounds to reconsider the third sentence of paragraph 53 of this order, given the purported new elements of evidence. But they didn't do it. Azerbaijan formulated its complaints solely in terms of the aggravation of the dispute, namely a breach of the extant order. And that is what Azerbaijan continues to argue in its memorial filed last week. Distinguished members of the Court, this configuration is not without similarities to the Qatar versus UAE case. Now, in that case, the Court first of all indicated provisional measures on Qatar's request. The UAE then attempted to obtain some provisional measures for themselves. Now, one of the measures that the UAE requested related to obstacles Qatar had allegedly placed in the way to the implementation by the Emirates of those provisional measures indicated earlier. The court dismissed this measure requested by the Emirates on the grounds that regarding compliance with provisional measures indicated earlier, the measure requested, I quote, does not concern plausible rights of the UAE under CERD, which require protection pending the final decision of the court in the case. End of quotation. Well, this precedent is clearly highly annoying for Azerbaijan. Indeed, if the alleged new operations of land mining by Armenia breach the obligation of non-aggravation created by the order of 7 December 2021, well, mutatis mutandis, the compliance with this obligation does not concern a plausible right under the CERD requiring protection pending the final decision of the court. But now, in very timely fashion, Azerbaijan understands things in a very different fashion. Abandoning its earlier position was of course rendered necessary by Azerbaijan's desire to neutralize Armenia's request for provisional measures by introducing in reaction its own request. So it's no longer any question at all of aggravation of the dispute covered by the order of January 2021, since the obligation of non-aggravation is not a plausible right under the Convention. Now it's a question of the alleged new facts justifying the revision of the dismissal Azerbaijan suffered back then. Under paragraph 32 of its new request on 3 January this year, Azerbaijan asserts that if your earlier order considered that convention didn't plausibly impose an obligation on Armenia to not lay landmines or to help with mine clearance, it's because the court considered that Azerbaijan had not acquitted itself of the incumbent burden of proof. So Azerbaijan is arguing that the third sentence of paragraph 53 is subordinate to the factual finding of the fourth sentence. Ms. Amarfar said the same thing this morning. According to her, I quote her,
found that the plausibility requirement had not been met at that time because of lack of evidence indicating that Armenia's alleged conduct impaired the equal enjoyment of the rights of Azerbaijanis on the basis of ethnic or national origin.
End of quotation. Well, with all due respect, that's not what the court decided in 2021. That's not correct. This new reading of paragraph 53 of your order of 2021 constitutes not only a pretty radical change and very timely change to what Azerbaijan maintained earlier, but it is above all wrong for those reasons that I have just set out. Let me add that the third sentence of this paragraph 53 categorically states that the convention does not plausibly impose any obligation on Armenia to take measures to enable Azerbaijan to undertake demining or to cease and desist from planting landmines. That's a quotation. The absence of any plausible obligation, any obligation. The absence of any plausible obligation under the Convention to enable demining or to cease planting mines is thus not an issue of fact or evidence, but a legal consideration tied to the text of the Convention, of course, but also to those characteristics proper to landmines, whose triggering is not a function of one of the factors prohibited by the said Convention. However, this notwithstanding, Azerbaijan is asking you once again to order Armenia to hand over all information on mines that Armenia might have and not to lay any more in those areas where Armenia is anyway not present. According to Azerbaijan, it is sufficient to establish that its citizens could be potentially affected by mines on its territories that it now controls to transform the convention into an instrument for mine clearance. Not only are the factual assertions of Azerbaijan wholly incorrect, as Professor Murphy showed a little earlier, but the new legal claim of the applicant stems from an incorrect reading of the order where you quite rightly refused, for reasons not only factual but also legal, to uphold Azerbaijan's request. Though the convention contains no plausible obligation to demine or to mine, Azerbaijan asks you to make an order to such effect. Furthermore, and now I come to my second point, those measures requested by Azerbaijan are so flawed that they cannot be ordered. First of all, these measures are formulated in particularly problematic terms. In effect, Azerbaijan is asking you firstly to order that Armenia, I quote, shall immediately take all necessary steps to enable Azerbaijan to undertake the prompt, safe and effective demining of areas where they intend to settle Azerbaijanis. Now, what this obligation covers precisely is not really clear. even if in non-exhaustive fashion Azerbaijan indicates a bit later on, that essentially it concerns providing information about the location, quantity, type and characteristics of landmines, booby traps, and any other explosive devices in these areas. That's a quotation. Madam President, distinguished members of the court, you've already heard it, but I see myself obliged to repeat it. Armenia has handed over all plans relative to the location of mines concerning territories where Armenia has been expelled from subsequent to the war in 2020. Armenia has no more. Anyhow, how could Armenia know, given that it's no longer in those areas? How could Armenia know where the booby traps might be hidden? Booby traps which could have been placed by civilians driven from their homes. Finally, in similar fashion to Azerbaijan's last request for provisional measures, where Azerbaijan asks you to allow it to require from Armenia the gathering of, you'll recall that, the gathering of criminal evidence, Azerbaijan stubbornly tries to obtain from the court a provisional measure enabling it to require this or that from Armenia as the mood takes it. You heard Professor Boisson de Chazouan this morning. Azerbaijan files provisional measures in order to, I quote, benefit from Armenia's cooperation. But what kind of cooperation are we talking about? And how will Azerbaijan benefit? Azerbaijan would like you to order Armenia, I quote, to take all necessary measures immediately to enable Azerbaijan to undertake demining. Now, what does that mean exactly? What that doubtless means in the mind of Azerbaijan is that it should be entitled to require anything it wants from Armenia as and when the desired behaviour could putatively, according to Azerbaijan, be necessary for mine clearance. In other words, Azerbaijan is inviting you to order a provisional measure allegedly aimed at cooperation between the parties, but in reality would swiftly morph into a real legal minefield between them. Moreover, the first measure requested by Azerbaijan isn't provisional. In reality, it attempts to achieve prematurely what Azerbaijan seeks on the merits. One of the reparation claims of Azerbaijan in its memorial recently filed is that the court judges and declares, I quote, Armenia is under an obligation to allow, facilitate and not interfere with the return of Azerbaijani internally displaced persons to their homes in the formerly occupied territories. End of quotation. Well, you'll note that the first provisional measure requested also has as a purpose, I quote, to enable Azerbaijani IDPs to return to their homes. This measure seeks thus to anticipate the judgment on the merits. Similarly, in the section of its memorial devoted to the remedies that it seeks, Azerbaijan argues that Armenia is allegedly, I quote, interfering with the right of displaced Azerbaijanis to return to their homes in the liberated territories, including by failing to provide accurate information by planting new landmines. End of citation. In other words, the complaint of Azerbaijan on the merits case is also what justified and constitutes its first provisional measure. So, Azerbaijan is not seeking to protect plausible rights whilst awaiting your judgment on the merits, but rather to anticipate the result it hopes for in the self-same judgment. However, as is well established, the purpose of requesting provisional measures is not to obtain a judgment, interim or final, on the merits of the case, but to preserve the substance of the rights which it claims pedente lite. I will add, distinguished members of the court, which is more worrying, that according to the words of the agent of Azerbaijan, it concerns the
as an ethnic origin or national origin group and not in relation to nationality or citizenship.
As they, as such, are allegedly prevented by the mines and booby traps purportedly planted by or facilitated by Armenia. The measure requested seeks to favour, thus, only the return of people of Azerbaijani national ethnic origin, once again revealing the Baku government's discriminatory preferences. The second measure requested by Azerbaijan is no less problematic. Indeed, Azerbaijan is asking you to order Armenia, I quote, to immediately cease and desist from any further efforts to plant or to sponsor or support the planting of landmines and booby traps in these areas to which Azerbaijani civilians will return in Azerbaijan's territory, including but not limited to the use of the Lachin territory for this purpose. End of quotation. This measure is asking you to acknowledge that the areas to which Azerbaijani civilians will return in Azerbaijan's territory are those designated right now by Azerbaijan itself, whereas this question essentially falls to your judgment on the merits. This measure reflects once again the discriminatory policy of Azerbaijan, whereby only ethnic Azerbaijani civilians and not ethnic Armenian civilians are to live on what it considers its territory. Furthermore, what does that actually really mean? I quote in English.
Dire précisément in these areas to which Azerbaijani civilians will return in Azerbaijan's territory, including but not limited to the use of the Lachin corridor. My colleague, Professor Murphy, recalled that, consistent with what it stated in 2021, Armenia is neither laying any mine outside its territory nor sponsoring such activity. The request thus seeks to prohibit an activity which doesn't exist. Anyhow, as Azerbaijan considers that the remaining part of Nagorno-Karabakh inhabited by Armenians is its own territory on which Armenians have no place, they're not welcome there. The second measure requested by Azerbaijan is, as you see, extremely problematic, because in reality it aims at obtaining right now a legal guarantee from the court to facilitate its ultimate political and military objective, which is wholly contrary to the convention, namely the conquest of what remains of Armenian Nagorno-Karabakh. Madam President, distinguished members of the court, the measures requested by Azerbaijan are deeply problematic, both in terms of their formulation and the substantive aim, and they're based on an understanding of the convention rejected by your order of 2021. For all the reasons put before you this afternoon, they should be dismissed. Madam President, pursuant to Practice Direction 11, you recalled at the commencement of these hearings, I won't respond to the lengthy arguments of our opponents, complete with pictures which were entirely relative to the merits of this case presented by our opponents. After having devoted a considerable part of this morning's hearings to the merits of the case, Azerbaijan thus usefully demonstrated that its file of alleged new evidence, as we saw from the surgical attack by Professor Murray, that dossier is as destitute today as it was in 2021, and that in reality, by devoting so much time to the merits of the case, what its request really seeks is to anticipate your judgment on the merits. Well, I'd like to thank the court for its kind attention. Can I ask you, Madam President, to call to the bar the agent of Armenia for the final submissions? Thank you.
I thank Professor Dajan, and I now invite the agent of Armenia, His Excellency Mr. Yagishe Kerakosian, to take the floor. You have the floor, Excellency.
Madam President, distinguished judges of the court, it is an honor and privilege to appear before you again. As our learned counsel have amply demonstrated, Azerbaijan's requests for provisional measures do not represent sincere, let alone actionable claims under the cert. They are engineered to create a false parity. I will now read the final submissions of the Republic of Armenia. On the basis of its oral pleadings, Armenia respectfully requests the court to reject Azerbaijan's request for the indication of provisional measures in full. Madam President, I thank the court for hosting our entire delegation here at the Peace Palace for the proceedings in both cases. We genuinely appreciate the court's willingness to sit for 2 successive hearings, provisional measure hearings. I would also like to express my gratitude to the registry for its meticulousness, expediency, as well as to the interpreters and other court personnel whose efforts contributed to the seamlessness of these hearings. Madam President, distinguished judges of the court, thank you for your kind attention. This concludes Armenia's presentation. Thank you.
I thank the agent of Armenia, whose statement brings to an end the single round of oral argument of Armenia, as well as the present series of sittings. In accordance with the usual practice, I shall request both agents to remain at the court's disposal to provide any additional information the court may require. The court will render its order on the request for the indication of provisional measures submitted by Azerbaijan as soon as possible. The agents of the parties will be advised in due course as to the date on which the court will deliver the order at a public sitting. Since the court has no other business before it today, the sitting is declared closed.